As Jason mentioned, it really is a reflection of what type of background you have in the activity. Having spent my entire life since in policy debating, which is focused entirely on the plan, the non-plan approaches to debate are so incredibly novel that I really haven't had an opportunity to spend much time there. I'm not even sure, since I left the West when CETA was in its heyday, when I was out Weaver in Utah, that I've judged around without a plan. I don't remember. I don't even think I have. So looking forward to the opportunity. But please, just because it says plan here, don't freak out. One, this is a 13-step program. It just says, if you're looking for a case and plan, you probably want to look at some of these things. I don't think you can do them all. Do the best you can. First, it's pretty obvious. You should have enough significance to outweigh potential disadvantages. I think this is a real obvious one, but some people just haven't learned. They find things they really like that are really these tiny affirmatives, and then they get crushed by big political disadvantages. And it's probably a good idea to have significance to outweigh them. It doesn't mean that you have to save millions of lives with your plan. It just means that you have to have a significance in the debate that you've constructed, which you then can use to outweigh the disadvantages. But you have to have that should be where the focus is. Second, you should have a unique implementation to de-link from the political disadvantages. I guess if you don't have a plan, that's probably the best way to de-link from the political disadvantage. But beyond that, find implementation which allows you to do that. This resolution would allow that in some degree if you just used the Supreme Court as an agent, for example, and got out of the legislative executive mandate in order to do it. There's a lot of, I think, interesting opportunities to do this, and you want to investigate it. Third, have internal link terms to the political dissad if you can. In other words, when you research your plan, try to find a plan that you could adopt, which, for example, I just give you a few examples here, might have some bipartisanship support. That might be a good idea because that would sort of get you out of a midterm election dissad. You might require even less focus than Bush would have to use if he was going to implement something else that's on, in the pipeline. The thing is, when you go to Thomas and you start checking about what bills are currently in the pipeline which deal with Native Americans, there's some in the pipeline that are probably much grander than you planned. And so Bush is going to have to expend some political capital eventually, whether to beat it or whether to pass it, because it doesn't look like a lot of these have a lot of support anyways. But regardless, I mean, you can look for that as well. Four, your plan should allow simple permutations. You should have a plan in such a way that you can really try to perm out of the counter plans and the critiques. Especially exclusion permutation, which is like do the counter plan everywhere, but the affirmative plan. That's always kind of an easy way of getting out of some counter plan situations. Then they have to prove that the plan alone is the link to whatever advantage comes from the counter plan. And of course, standard other permutations, do the counter plan and plan simultaneously. Or your language should allow you to do that. So the language of the plan should be sufficiently flexible. You shouldn't be overly committing yourselves. There was a period where they actually put people on boards and did all that stuff that was much more technically specific. And of course, the debate community has shied away from that. Fifth, you should have effectual terminology written into the plan in order to increase the range of your intent. In other words, your plan actually has words in it which suggest the direction you want the plan to focus in, like where you want the significance to be. It's like people who actually put the resolution in their plans. But you should really have like almost some level of effectual language written in the plan, which gives you a little more flexibility when you do the intent. Sixth, you should probably have a solvency advocate. You should have someone who agrees with you that your plan's a good idea. Even though I think you can make a cogent argument that the advocates in the round are the people who are in the debate. I think that's fine as well, but there seems to be some demand on many quarters that the solvency that if you're writing a plan, you need to have a decent solvency advocate. I can tell that anecdote about with Maggie and Aaron. One of my debate teams was in a debate round, and someone demanded that they have a solvency advocate. And Aaron stood up and she debated with a woman named Maggie, and she turned to Maggie and she goes, "Maggie, dig into the files. We need a solvency advocate, preferably one that's white and male." At that point, the other team decided not to push them very hard. Plan should have the support of a range of advocates. You should have a range of advocates who agree with you. Number 7 is my favorite because it's really kind of fun. I enjoy doing it because I like to read stuff. I don't just like to read academic universe stuff. The plan should be researchable off from academic universe and LexisNexis. In other words, it should be really hard for them to do the research of your plan just going to that source. you should require them to go to the library in order to really take your case down. And it's much more of a challenge to do that. Did that years ago. We wrote a case on Palau, which is a small Micronesian country. It used to be called Palau, and we didn't tell anybody. So after they changed their name, we ran our Palau affirmative. And people went to Lexus, they couldn't find Palau anymore, because it just changed its name. And it worked really well for quite a while, until people figured out it was. But then we claimed Palau was its slave name, so we also had another argument later. But that was an example. We try to find stuff that's in the literature that they're going to have to find. And there's some obscure literature on this topic. I think Ethnic News Watch gives you a nice body of obscure literature to turn to. When I was at the library today, I looked up this material in the historical abstracts, and I found some interesting material there as well. But that requires you to actually go to the journal and read the journal article, and it's not going to be on LexisNexis. And so, you know, all the people who spend all their time sitting in front of the terminals upgrading their politics disadvantage won't be able to find any specific evidence related to your plan. 8, plan or plan advantages should be critique eaters. You know, you should find a way to design your plans in such a way that it makes them less pervious to the standard critiques. We've seen these before. That's where you employ feminist international relations within the plan. You avoid the threat construction when you write the plan. Your time frame to debates are difficult on critiques as well. You should use the language of the critiques when you write your plan. I mean, that's just a standard way of trying to avoid some of the standard arguments. Number 9, I don't know how else to write this sentence, by the way, so, plan should speak with the voice of the victims and distance itself from the voice of the oppressors. That's pretty true on this topic. I mean, the more your plan is speaking to the ideas and concepts that Native Americans embrace, I think the stronger the plan will be. And so it's important, I think, to find not just a solvency advocate who's Native American, but also find a plan that's Native American, right? One that's closer to what Native Americans would embrace. And that's going to be a real challenge, because most Native Americans really aren't overly impressed with how the United States federal government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs deals with their problems. 10, plan should be doing something better than what's inevitable. That's the wonderful one, where you can actually find what the present system is planning on doing and do something that's better than that, even if it's less than that, right? And that way, no matter what they're arguing, you can say, yeah, but it's a lot better than what's going to happen. And so no matter how bad the plan is, it's always better than what could be. And so it sort of distances you from some arguments. 11's one of my favorite. You should cut something that hasn't been done yet, right? You find something that they're planning on doing, and then you prevent it from happening. And so it's never really happened yet, so it's really hard to get a link story to anything. And then you stop it from happening. And that's always a fun thing to do. Not for the negative, but it's fun for you. 12, spend resources already appropriated is kind of fun. Try to find, it really does apply to this debate topic. We tend to appropriate funds to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but the appropriation, I just studied this 2 days ago, and we're going to talk about when we do delay counterplans and such. But there's a way that the Congress passes the appropriation bills, and they ride into the association bills this implementation delay. Like they built it into the appropriation bills. Right? So they say, here's the money, but we're not going to spend the money. But you have the money, but you're not allowed to spend it for a period of time. And you might want to do that. That's kind of interesting. Find bills which have been appropriated, so fully appropriated everything. Just get rid of the rider that was built into the bills and make sure the money can get spent, which is kind of interesting. 13 is pretty obvious. You should have a broad range of advantage add-ons. You should have lots of them. As many advantage add-ons as you can. Sort of the Dartmouth approach, where they just get up there and answer your arguments and run an add-on, and then another argument and run 2 more add-ons, and they just keep running them and running them and running them. And it's a very productive thing to do. And the more add-ons you can jam into the debate, the best. So you want your plan to have a lot of possibilities there. But I mean, I don't know how else to look at the subject matter, right? I just wanted to give you a list of ideas, and then have us discuss it as much as possible, because these are just how I feel. And I'm sure you have other ideas or input, or you want to reject all of these on its face, which is fine by me. Comments? Yeah?
I'm just wondering, because I'm just starting to think about, what debating without a plan would mean. and so, you know, the first one, what's the logic that the affirmative needs to have a plan? I mean, I know that affirmatives like to pick plans because then they don't have to debate the whole res, but.
Yeah, Amy's question is pretty much what's it like to debate without a plan? Pretty much why a plan? I could give you, you know, my experience in it, and one of our 40s people could probably talk about this better than I can at this point. In CETA years ago, they had debate resolutions that didn't have the word should in it. Mm-hmm. And what ended up happening was, when you were on the affirmative, you were presumably obligated to debate the entire resolution as a category of ideas. And so what the negative would end up doing is come up with contrary evaluations of the truth of the resolution, and they call them like counterarguments. They were just disadvantages to the resolution, right? And it made a real messy debate, because it's just like, I mean, not trying to slam Lincoln Douglas debating, but most of the Lincoln Douglas I saw was scary, right? Because someone would stand up on the affirmative and say, here's my proof the resolution's true. And they would go, here's my proof the resolution's not true. And they'd have nothing to do with each other. And at the end of the debate, there were, you know, these poor judges were trying to figure out who the hell they were going to vote for. And CETA had the same problem. And so what they did is they started saying, here's the resolution, and here's the proof of the resolution I'm willing to defend, right? So they would choose some territory in the resolution. They would defend that specific territory. They would claim that that territory is good territory. Like, if this is true, probably the rest of the resolution is true. That's what that argument would be. And so that, in CETA, came really close to being a plan. And then, actually, unfortunately, in a final round between Weber and the University of Utah years ago, in a CETA tournament on the West Coast, both teams agreed to run a plan, right? And so that sort of like broke it, you know, and people just went, well, you know, yeah, the example's a hell of a lot like a plan. You know, it's not really much difference. We're just talking about, you know, calling it a plan. It was just an example before. And the plan as an element seems to be traced back to the 40s, from what I saw. And that's because the resolutions were really specific prior to then. And then around the 40s, they started getting a little bigger. And so as the subject matter got larger, people began to figure out that they had to corral what had to happen. And so what happened in policy debate in the 40s is exactly what happened in CETA debate in the 80s. And now there seems to be at least a handful of people who are willing to look at the debate resolution and not run a plan. You know, and who wants to talk? You guys, I mean, you have the experience on this. I don't. Come up and be on TV. Or turn it around and show them.
Well, I think that a plan is sort of, the reason to run a plan is sort of if you view the resolution as a policy, sort of policy type debate in traditional sense, like if you're going to debate what the governments should do, that in that world a plan really makes sense and it seems like the best option, because then you're discussing the implementation and things like that. But if you view the resolution in a slightly different manner, where the resolution is more, allows for a framing of a question and about different ways that you can view that resolution, and it's not necessarily going through that governmental, like Congress action, then that's the reason to not run a plan. Like, there is no innate reason why you should run a plan. That's why last year I would get so frustrated when people would run, you know, the argument you've got to have a plan, because it doesn't make any sense really. Like, you know, like I can understand topicality, you know, sort of, you know, that topicality is, you know, it can be a fine issue or whatever, but the nature of the plan relies on an assumption that you want to debate what Congress does. And so there's no reason why that plan has to be there if that's not necessarily the focus of the debate.
How do you affirm the resolution without saying Congress should do that?
Well, in our instance, well, first of all, you don't have to necessarily say, you don't have to have a plan in order to say Congress should do something. You can make, you know, just sort of the basic, you know, like sometimes people run that, like, we demand stuff or whatever. But at the same time, what we did was we sort of redefined what it meant to be the U.S. federal government. And so for our affirmative, that's why topicality makes so much sense, because we didn't use that traditional U.S. federal government. But when you redefine the U.S. federal government, a plan doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, if Joe and I are the U.S. federal government, then, you know, what does it mean to have a one-paragraph plan? You know, instead, our 1AC functions as our advocacy, which is, you know, just as good as any plan.
Want to add anything, Joe? Joe says no. The only example I could give is, and I think it's fascinating in a way, because I think one of the ways to do it is to redefine the actor in the resolution, which is fine. Because, you know, I mean, the United States federal government's not the greatest entity on the planet. I'm not sure I really want to defend it in many instances. This topic, I'm not even sure I can come close to defending it. But beyond that, the other thing is to look at the word should in the debate resolution, which I always thought was interesting. And I have a bizarre anecdote. I was in high school in New England, and I went to a debate tournament that was on a Friday and Saturday. And what ended up happening, and the out rounds were on Sunday. On Friday, we ran our affirmative, and it was an emission control topic, a pollution control topic, and we were arguing that we should use emission standards rather than ambient standards. On Friday, Congress passed our plan. Right, it made it through Congress, and every indication was the president was just going to sign it. Right, and I mean, we were like screwed going into day 2 and 3. Right, and then what we did is we got our wits together, redefined the word should. And that changed a lot of debating, because we argued we didn't need a plan, but we argued for a whole different reason. We would argue that everyone looks at should as if it's a command, and we looked at should as if it was a recommendation. And so we argued that should as a recommendation was not only was it good that the president that they passed our plan because it was a good idea, but it proved that the recommendation was a valid recommendation, because of the decision to actually pass the plan. And we actually made it through the Olymps at BC High School that year at the national tournament. We had some damn good teams. And like, you know, people were going, yeah, I want to go negative, but I mean, they kept just running inherency arguments, and we just kept defining what the word should was. We lost our plan in that instance. You know, we didn't start the debate doing it, we just had to cover our ass at the end because we had lost it. But I think redefining the agent is obviously a good way. This topic is probably an awesome way to look at the debate resolution if you think about it, because it's very difficult to defend federal control. Okay, incredibly difficult, at least in the conventional concept of what federal control might be. The federal government clamp down on Native Americans is probably a really bad idea. We've done such a bad job in the past. The other probably could be playing around with the word should, which was the other way of doing it. Any other questions or remarks on this? Any additions? Debate communities got really boring on plans. You know, there were some incredibly interesting things going on in the 70s that disappeared. The alternative justification affirmative disappeared, which is fascinating because it was a multiple plan debate where people would get up and say, here's 3 ideas, all of which are very good that we should do on this debate topic, any one of which would prove the resolution true. And so you would pretty much run 3 cases with 3 plans. When Tuna was coaching at Seton Hall when I was there, we used to run 5 cases with 5 plans in the 1AC, right? And that was alternative justification. And of course, you know, I mean, the negatives would bitch at you and everything, but you know, everybody was on the same level of footing. I mean, you know, when you're running that much stuff in a debate round, you pretty much you better have the fun foundational elements of each of these ideas together. Otherwise, you know, it'd be really problematic to try to get through the rebuttals. The other approach, which my partner and I did at Seton Hall for a while, is we ran multiple plans for the same advantage, which is kind of interesting. We said the federal government should consider these 3 options in trying to change its policy in terms of the gathering of information. So what you could do is, you know, say, here are 3 ways of getting to the same advantage. Because the advantage we wanted was to secure privacy, confidentiality, and so we came up with 3 different ways the federal government could do it. On the topic you have here, and the plan we're running for child welfare, easily do that. One of the plans would have the Congress do it, the other plan would have the Supreme Court vacate it. 2 completely different ways for the federal government to solve the problem with the Indian Child Welfare Act. But totally topical. They're just different routes, and they could make the decision which one to use. I mean, you could clearly claim that, you know, you're really not the agent. I mean, you know, no one's going to take any one of us seriously when we suggest what the federal government should do. We might be able to convince them they should do something, but we sure the hell ain't going to convince them that they should do it our way. And so you could argue that. There's a lot of incredibly creative things you can do. It's just the debate community sort of got into the old, you know, here's one plan. You know, I mean, I don't know how you feel in the negative. I hear a lot of rounds where I'm hearing a counter plan that really is like 3 in 1 anyways, right? You know, they want you to run one counter plan, so you just, you know, make it this big, meaty thing, which is really like 2 or 3 counter plans anyways. Just call it one just to keep happy. And they want you to do the same thing on the affirmative. Anything else? Okay, that's just some ideas on strategic case selection, or strategic plan selection, whatever. And take some time, and Jethro is going to be next with counterplans and dissents.